If I wake up in her room one more time, lock me inside the dungeon, Alpha King Ethan Ashford said, and every royal guard believed he was joking. Ethan did not smile. For the 7th morning in less than 2 weeks, he opened his eyes beneath a modest wooden ceiling instead of the carved stone arches above his royal bed. Soft golden sunlight slipped through a small window dressed with plain linen curtains, carrying the gentle scent of fresh lavender and rain. It was never the royal chamber. It was always the same tiny room hidden within the eastern servants' quarters. His heart pounded as he slowly sat upright, careful not to make a sound. The narrow bed beside him remained perfectly undisturbed except for the young Omega, sleeping peacefully beneath a neatly folded quilt. Lily Carter rested on her side with one hand tucked beneath her cheek, completely unaware that the most powerful alpha in the kingdom had somehow spent another night only a few feet away. Ethan immediately stood, confusion washing across his face. He looked toward the locked wooden door. The latch was still secured from the inside. The only key belonged to Lily. The small room contained nothing unusual. A worn bookshelf, a simple wooden chair, a tiny table with a half-finished cup of herbal tea. Fresh wildflowers rested inside a glass jar beside the window, bringing quiet warmth into an otherwise humble space. Nothing explained how he kept arriving there. Ethan quietly adjusted his dark coat before glancing at Lily one final time. She looked exhausted, as though she had spent another long day working throughout the palace. A loose strand of golden hair rested across her face. Without thinking, Ethan gently moved it aside so it would not disturb her breathing. The moment his hand pulled away, his expression hardened. Instincts, he whispered to himself. Nothing more. He slipped out the door without making a sound and crossed the silent servant corridor before sunrise painted the palace walls with pale gold. Less than 30 minutes later, he entered the royal council chamber wearing the calm expression expected of an alpha king, but his thoughts never left the little room behind him. The council discussed border agreements, grain shipments, and preparations for the upcoming moon festival. Ethan answered every question correctly, yet his mind replayed the same impossible mystery. His private chambers were guarded every night. His bedroom door remained locked from the inside. The palace wolves had never wandered freely through the royal residence. Nothing about this made sense. After the meeting ended, Captain Mason Reed approached quietly. "Your Majesty, you look as though you barely slept." Ethan hesitated before answering. "Apparently, I slept very well." Mason frowned, confused by the strange reply. Ethan simply walked away. Later that afternoon, while inspecting the eastern gardens, Ethan noticed Lily carrying a basket filled with fresh herbs toward the palace kitchens. She greeted every gardener with a warm smile, thanked an elderly groundskeeper for trimming the roses, and paused long enough to help a young servant gather dropped bundles of rosemary after the wind scattered them across the path. She never noticed Ethan watching from beneath the shade of an ancient oak tree. There was nothing extraordinary about her appearance. She wore a clean but simple dress, sensible shoes, and the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being overlooked. Yet every palace wolf lying beneath the nearby trees slowly lifted its head as she passed. Not one barked. Not one growled. Instead, each animal calmly watched her with peaceful eyes before settling back into the grass, as though her presence alone eased something deep within them. Ethan felt an unfamiliar chill travel through him. He had spent his entire life understanding wolves. Today, for the first time, he realized his own might be keeping a secret from him. The following evening, Ethan Ashford refused to leave anything to chance. Every entrance to his royal chamber was inspected twice. Captain Mason Reed personally assigned 4 trusted guards outside the bedroom doors with clear instructions that no one, including the Alpha King himself, was to leave unnoticed. The windows overlooking the northern cliffs were secured from the inside, and the heavy oak doors were locked before Ethan placed the only key inside a small silver box on the table beside his bed. "If I wake up anywhere except this room," Ethan said quietly, "I expect an explanation that does not insult my intelligence." Mason forced a polite smile. "You have my word, Your Majesty." Ethan dismissed everyone and stood alone in the silent chamber. Moonlight poured across the polished stone floor while the distant sound of wolves echoed through the forest surrounding the palace. Normally the familiar calls brought him comfort. Tonight they only deepened the mystery. Before extinguishing the final candle, Ethan caught his reflection in the tall mirror beside the fireplace. Dark hair perfectly in place, formal night robe neatly fastened, calm eyes that betrayed none of the confusion beneath them. He whispered the same explanation that had become almost routine. It is only instincts. Then he climbed into bed. Morning arrived with the cheerful singing of small birds. Ethan slowly opened his eyes and immediately knew something was wrong. The mattress beneath him felt softer. The air carried the gentle fragrance of lavender instead of cedarwood. Sunlight filtered through simple linen curtains rather than the heavy royal drapes. He sat upright so quickly that the blanket slipped to the floor. Once again, he was inside Lily Carter's tiny room. Ethan stared at the locked wooden door in disbelief. His own chamber had been impossible to leave without passing 4 guards. Yet here he was. He quietly walked toward the door and examined the lock. Still secured from the inside. No signs of damage. No hidden passage. No explanation. A faint rustling sound made him turn around. Lily had awakened. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. She blinked slowly, clearly surprised to see the Alpha King standing near her window before sunrise for the second time in recent memory. Instead of panicking, she simply looked puzzled. "Good morning, Your Majesty," she said gently. Ethan looked almost embarrassed. "I owe you another apology." Lily sat up, pulling the quilt neatly around herself out of simple habit. "Did you become lost again?" Ethan almost laughed despite the impossible situation. I wish that answer still made sense. Lily studied him for a quiet moment before offering a warm smile. "Would you like some tea?" The question caught him completely off guard. She was not frightened. She was not demanding an explanation. She was offering breakfast to the king she kept mysteriously finding in her room. Ethan politely shook his head. "Thank you, but I should leave before the palace begins asking difficult questions." Lily nodded with complete understanding. The hallway is usually empty at this hour. As Ethan reached the door, Lily spoke again. "Your Majesty?" He paused. "Yes." She hesitated before asking softly, "Are you sleeping well?" Ethan looked at her with genuine surprise. Anyone else would have worried about themselves. Lily was worried about him. After a long silence, he answered honestly, "Apparently I sleep best in places I cannot explain." Lily smiled as though the strange answer somehow made perfect sense. Ethan quietly left the room and returned to the palace before anyone noticed his absence. Later that afternoon, he ordered every royal physician, scholar, and wolf historian available to gather inside the royal library. Ancient scrolls covered the long oak tables as experts searched for any record of sleepwalking alphas, unusual wolf behavior, or forgotten magical bonds. Hours passed without answers. Every explanation failed. As evening settled across the kingdom, Ethan stood alone beside the library window watching the full moon rise above the distant forest. Deep inside, his wolf stirred with quiet satisfaction, as though it already knew exactly where it intended to spend the coming night. The mystery refused to loosen its grip on Ethan Ashford. Every precaution he took only seemed to prove that ordinary explanations no longer belonged in this story. On the 3rd night, he ordered a second chamber prepared in the western tower, nearly half a mile from his usual quarters. No servant was told why. Only Captain Mason Reed knew the plan, and even he looked uncertain as he watched the Alpha King personally inspect every window, every lock, and every stone wall. "If I disappear again," Ethan said, placing the key inside his pocket instead of leaving it near the bed, "do not follow me. I need to understand whether I am walking there, or whether something else is leading me." Mason bowed respectfully, although the request unsettled him. "As you command, Your Majesty." The palace settled into silence beneath another clear night. Ethan lay awake for hours, refusing to surrender to sleep. He focused on the crackling fireplace, counted every distant bell from the palace clock tower, and forced his thoughts toward matters of state instead of the impossible little room waiting somewhere beyond the eastern halls. Eventually, exhaustion became stronger than determination. His eyes closed. When dawn arrived, Ethan did not need to open his eyes to know where he was. The familiar fragrance of lavender drifted gently through the cool morning air. Somewhere nearby, a kettle began to whistle softly above a tiny stove. He let out a quiet sigh before slowly sitting upright. Across the room, Lily Carter stood by the small wooden table preparing tea as though nothing extraordinary had happened. She turned, smiled politely, and greeted him with surprising calm. "Good morning, Your Majesty." Ethan looked down at himself. His boots had been removed and placed neatly beside the bed. His heavy cloak rested folded across the chair. He had no memory of doing either. "Did I?" He stopped, unable to finish the question. Lily looked almost apologetic. "You were asleep when you arrived. I thought you would be more comfortable without your boots." Ethan blinked. "I arrived while asleep?" She nodded gently. "You knocked only once. When I opened the door, your eyes were closed. You were already standing there." A silence settled between them. Ethan searched her expression for fear, curiosity, or suspicion, but found none. She simply accepted what had happened because arguing with reality would not change it. "Did I say anything?" he asked quietly. Lily smiled at the memory. "Only 3 words." Ethan waited. "You said, 'Found you again.'" His heart skipped. He had absolutely no memory of speaking. Before either of them could continue, a soft scratching sound came from outside the window. Lily opened it, and a large silver wolf quietly climbed onto the windowsill before stepping into the room. Ethan immediately recognized the animal. It was the palace's oldest guardian wolf, a creature that rarely approached anyone except members of the royal bloodline. Yet instead of greeting the Alpha King, the magnificent wolf walked directly toward Lily. She laughed softly and scratched behind its ears as though greeting an old friend. The wolf closed its eyes with complete contentment before calmly resting beside her feet. Ethan stared in disbelief. "Does it visit often?" Lily nodded. "Sometimes, usually on quiet mornings." Ethan frowned. "It trusts almost no one." Lily looked genuinely surprised. "Really? It has always been gentle with me." As if proving her words, the old wolf lifted its head, glanced briefly at Ethan, then returned its attention to Lily with peaceful satisfaction. Ethan suddenly remembered what he had seen in the palace gardens only days earlier. Every wolf had reacted the same way. Calm, protective, completely at peace. The realization settled deep inside him, bringing more questions than answers. Whatever secret surrounded Lily did not belong to him alone. Every wolf in the kingdom seemed to recognize something about her long before any human ever could, and for reasons Ethan still could not explain, his own wolf appeared determined to be the closest of them all. By the end of the week, Ethan Ashford had stopped trying to convince himself that coincidence was responsible. Every morning ended the same way. Every sunrise found him inside Lily Carter's quiet little room, and every explanation he had trusted throughout his life collapsed beneath one undeniable truth. His wolf always found her. During the day, however, Ethan behaved as though nothing unusual existed between them. Whenever they crossed paths in the palace corridors, he greeted Lily with the same calm courtesy he offered every loyal servant. He never lingered. He never searched for excuses to speak with her. He maintained the careful distance expected of a king. Yet something entirely different happened whenever wolves were nearby. It became impossible not to notice. One crisp autumn afternoon, Ethan inspected the palace kennels where young guardian wolves completed their training. The animals were energetic, restless, and easily distracted by unfamiliar scents. Their handlers struggled to keep them focused until Lily arrived carrying fresh towels and baskets of dried herbs requested by the palace healer. The change was immediate. Every wolf stopped pacing. Several quietly approached her, not with excitement, but with remarkable peace. They lowered their heads, leaned gently against her hands, and settled onto the ground as though they had finally reached the place where they belonged. Even the youngest wolves, usually impossible to calm, became completely still beneath her touch. Ethan watched from across the training yard without saying a word. One trainer noticed his expression and spoke carefully. "Your Majesty, they have behaved this way around Miss Carter for several months. We thought perhaps she simply has a gift with animals." Ethan did not answer immediately. He had trained wolves since childhood. Obedience could be taught. Loyalty could be earned. Fear could be overcome. But this quiet certainty was something entirely different. These wolves were not being trained. They were choosing peace. Later that afternoon, Ethan intentionally avoided the eastern wing of the palace, determined to prove that he remained fully in control of his own thoughts. He buried himself in official documents, met with visiting merchants, reviewed harvest reports, and approved funding for repairs to several villages before sunset. Every task demanded his attention, yet every unexpected pause allowed the same image to return. Lily smiling as the old guardian wolf rested peacefully beside her feet. That evening, while walking through the royal gardens alone, Ethan discovered Lily kneeling beside a small flower bed near the greenhouse. One of the palace gardener's aging sheepdogs lay quietly beside her with its head resting across her lap. The old dog had suffered aching joints for years and rarely allowed strangers to come near. Lily slowly brushed its silver fur while humming a melody so soft that Ethan could barely hear it above the evening breeze. The dog sighed with complete contentment. Lily finally noticed Ethan standing several yards away. She immediately rose and offered a respectful bow. "Good evening, Your Majesty." Ethan glanced toward the peaceful old dog. "It seems every creature in this palace enjoys your company." Lily smiled with quiet embarrassment. "Animals have always been kind to me. I do not know why." Ethan studied her face, searching for any sign that she understood what was happening around her. Instead, he found only simple honesty. She truly had no idea. As the conversation ended, the old sheepdog slowly stood and walked directly to Ethan before stopping beside him. For a brief moment, the dog looked up at the Alpha King, then gently nudged his hand toward Lily as if offering a silent suggestion before calmly returning to her side. Ethan remained frozen. He had spent his entire life believing that he understood the language of wolves. Now it seemed every animal in the kingdom understood something about his own heart that he had yet to discover. Lily Carter had never considered herself remarkable. She believed her quiet life inside the palace existed for one simple purpose: to help wherever she was needed and remain unnoticed afterward. Each morning she gathered herbs from the eastern gardens before the sun climbed above the castle walls. She prepared soothing teas for tired servants, fresh bandages for the palace healer, and small bundles of wildflowers that brightened lonely corners of the royal residence. She never expected praise. A grateful smile was more than enough. Ethan Ashford began paying closer attention without allowing anyone to notice. Instead of asking questions directly, he simply observed. Wherever Lily walked, nervous animals relaxed. Horses that usually shied away from unfamiliar people lowered their heads as she brushed their manes. Tiny songbirds landed near her while she watered the gardens without showing the slightest fear. Even the palace falcons, known for trusting only their assigned handlers, remained perfectly calm whenever she stepped into the courtyard beneath their perches. None of it seemed unusual to Lily herself. She treated every living creature with the same quiet kindness. One cool afternoon, heavy gray clouds gathered above the mountains, bringing a steady autumn rain that emptied the palace gardens. Ethan stood beneath the covered stone walkway reviewing construction plans when he noticed Lily hurrying across the wet courtyard with her basket held above her head. She suddenly stopped beside a small maple tree. Curled beneath the lowest branches sat a young silver wolf no larger than an ordinary farm dog. Its front paw appeared sore, and rain soaked its thick fur. Without hesitation, Lily carefully placed her basket beneath the tree to keep the herbs dry before kneeling several feet away. She did not call the frightened animal. She simply waited. Her patience seemed almost endless. After several quiet minutes, the young wolf slowly limped toward her. Lily gently wrapped its paw with a clean strip of cloth from her apron before softly rubbing behind its ears. The frightened expression disappeared almost immediately. Ethan watched every moment from across the courtyard. The young wolf belonged to no one. It had been rescued from the northern forest only days earlier after becoming separated from its pack. Even experienced trainers had struggled to approach it. Yet Lily had earned its trust without a single command. When she finished, the wolf followed her all the way to the palace stable before lying peacefully outside the door, refusing to leave her side. Ethan felt something shift deep within him. It was not simply admiration. It was recognition. His wolf stirred with quiet certainty, filling his thoughts with an unfamiliar sense of calm whenever Lily smiled. That evening, Ethan summoned the oldest palace records once again, searching for any mention of omegas whose presence naturally comforted wolves. Most scrolls described ordinary bonds between companions and guardians. None matched what he had witnessed with his own eyes. Only one weathered journal, written generations earlier by an elder historian, contained a single sentence that refused to leave his mind. Some hearts carry a peace that wolves remember before people do. Ethan closed the ancient book and stared into the fire beside his desk. He had spent days searching for complicated answers hidden inside forgotten legends. Yet perhaps the truth had always been far simpler. His wolf had never been chasing a mystery. It had been returning to the one place where it had already found peace, long before the man inside the wolf was willing to admit that he had found it too. The days that followed brought an uneasy calm, but Ethan Ashford sensed it could not last forever. The palace continued its familiar rhythm as servants hurried through marble corridors, merchants arrived with wagons of autumn harvests, and musicians rehearsed for the approaching moon festival. To everyone else, the kingdom remained peaceful. Only Ethan felt the quiet pull growing stronger with every sunset. It was no longer just a mystery waiting for an answer. It felt like an invisible promise refusing to be ignored. On the evening before the festival, Ethan deliberately remained awake later than ever before. He sat alone in the royal observatory overlooking the valley, watching thousands of stars slowly emerge across the clear night sky. Ancient books surrounded him, each one describing forgotten traditions between alphas, omegas, and their wolves, yet none explained why his own instincts had begun making decisions without his consent. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him once again. The next thing Ethan remembered was the gentle sound of rain tapping against a small window. He slowly opened his eyes. As expected, he was inside Lily Carter's room. This time, however, something felt different. He was awake immediately. His thoughts were clear. He had not awakened after the journey had ended. He had awakened in the middle of it. Without making a sound, Ethan remained still and listened. Lily was asleep beneath her neatly folded quilt, but her breathing had become uneven. Her face tightened with quiet worry as though she had wandered into an unpleasant dream. A faint whisper escaped her lips, too soft to understand. Before Ethan could move, a strange warmth spread through his chest. It was familiar and unfamiliar at the same time, like hearing a melody he had somehow known his entire life. His wolf responded first, not with fear, not with aggression, only with an overwhelming desire to comfort. Ethan watched in silent amazement as his own body acted almost naturally. He stepped closer to the bedside, gently pulled the blanket back over Lily's shoulder where it had slipped aside, and quietly rested his hand against the wooden headboard beside her rather than disturbing her sleep. Almost immediately, her breathing steadied. The worried lines across her face slowly disappeared. Within seconds, she looked completely peaceful again. Ethan remained frozen. For the first time, he had witnessed his own instincts instead of waking after they had already finished guiding him. There had been no command, no conscious decision, only an undeniable certainty that protecting her mattered more than anything else in that moment. Lily slowly opened her eyes a few moments later. She looked at Ethan standing beside the bed and smiled sleepily without surprise. "You are awake this time," she said softly. Ethan nodded, unable to hide the emotion in his voice. "I did not come here by accident." Lily looked at him with gentle curiosity. "I never thought you did." Those simple words struck him harder than every ancient record he had read. She had never accused him. She had never questioned his intentions. She had simply accepted that something beyond either of them was quietly unfolding. As dawn painted the eastern sky with soft shades of gold, Ethan walked toward the window instead of the door. Looking across the palace grounds, he finally admitted the truth he had resisted for weeks. His wolf had never been lost. His wolf had never been confused. The only one still wandering without direction had been the man trying to outrun the wisdom of his own heart. After leaving Lily Carter's room that morning, Ethan Ashford did not return to the council chamber or the royal training grounds. Instead, he rode alone beyond the palace walls to the oldest sanctuary in the kingdom, a quiet stone temple hidden among towering pine trees where the elder wolves had gathered for generations. Only a handful of people knew the sacred place still existed. The oldest guardian, Elder Rowan, was already waiting beneath an ancient white oak as though he had expected Ethan's arrival long before sunrise. His silver hair moved gently in the mountain breeze, while several elderly wolves rested peacefully around him. None reacted with surprise when the Alpha King approached. Elder Rowan simply smiled with calm understanding. "You finally stopped asking where your wolf goes," he said softly. "Now you have come to ask why." Ethan bowed respectfully before speaking. "I have searched every record in the palace. Nothing explains what is happening." The elder slowly gestured toward the wolves sleeping beneath the tree. Perhaps because you have searched among words instead of hearts. Ethan frowned. Then tell me what my wolf already knows. Elder Rowan remained silent for several moments before looking directly into Ethan's eyes. When did your wolf first become restless? Ethan thought carefully. The day I first saw Lily in the eastern garden. And when did it become peaceful again? Whenever I found myself near her. The elder nodded as though every answer confirmed something he had understood all along. Then the mystery ended the day it began. Only you continued searching. Ethan looked toward the forest where sunlight filtered through the branches in quiet ribbons of gold. If the answer is so simple, why could I not see it? Elder Rowan gently placed one weathered hand upon the rough bark of the ancient oak. Because an alpha often believes his greatest strength is control. Yet wolves were never created to control everything. They were created to recognize truth before fear has the chance to deny it. Ethan lowered his eyes. Every night his wolf had chosen the same path, without hesitation, while he spent every day trying to explain it away. Are you saying my wolf chose Lily before I ever did? Elder Rowan smiled. No. Ethan looked up, confused. I am saying your heart chose her first. Your wolf simply refused to forget what you were trying very hard not to feel. Those words settled over Ethan with astonishing clarity. Every memory suddenly fit together. The peaceful mornings. The calm that surrounded Lily. The way every wolf trusted her without question. The strange comfort he had felt simply watching her care for others without expecting recognition. None of it had been random. None of it had been magic. It had been truth arriving quietly, long before he was willing to welcome it. Ethan finally asked the question he had avoided for weeks. Does Lily know? Elder Rowan slowly shook his head. She knows only kindness. She does not realize what her presence awakens in those who still remember how to listen. As Ethan prepared to leave, every elderly wolf resting beneath the oak quietly stood. One by one, they looked toward the distant palace instead of their king, as though silently pointing him home. Ethan followed their gaze, and for the first time since this impossible journey had begun, he smiled without confusion. His wolf had never been leading him away from duty. It had been leading him toward the one person who made even the strongest alpha feel completely at peace. For the first time since the strange mornings had begun, Ethan Ashford walked toward the eastern servants' quarters in broad daylight, instead of waking there without explanation. Every step felt different. There was no mystery guiding him now. No instinct he could blame. No hidden path traveled while asleep. This time he chose every step with open eyes. Servants passing through the corridor immediately bowed as the Alpha King approached, quietly wondering why the ruler of the kingdom had entered the most humble wing of the palace alone. Ethan acknowledged each greeting with his usual calm dignity before stopping outside one familiar wooden door. For several seconds, he simply stood there. He realized he had entered this room countless times without remembering a single journey, yet knocking on the door, while fully awake, somehow required more courage than facing any royal council or battlefield ever had. At last, he gently knocked. A moment later, the door opened. Lily Carter looked up in surprise, though not in fear. Your Majesty, she said warmly. You remembered the way this time. Ethan could not help smiling. I wanted to. She stepped aside, inviting him inside with the same simple kindness she had always shown. Nothing had changed within the little room. Fresh wildflowers rested beside the window. A kettle quietly warmed over the small stove. The scent of lavender still lingered in the air. Yet everything felt different because, for the first time, Ethan was seeing the room through his own decision instead of through forgotten instincts. Lily poured 2 cups of herbal tea and placed one before him. Neither of them hurried to fill the silence. It was comfortable, peaceful, almost familiar. Ethan looked around before quietly saying, I spent weeks searching libraries, questioning scholars, and doubting my own mind. Lily looked at him with gentle curiosity. Did you find the answer? Ethan nodded slowly. I found someone who reminded me that sometimes the heart recognizes truth before the mind is willing to accept it. Lily lowered her eyes with a thoughtful smile. That sounds wise. Ethan laughed softly. It also sounds painfully accurate. They shared a quiet moment before Ethan continued. Every morning I apologized for being here because I believed I had done something wrong. Lily looked at him with complete sincerity. I never thought you had. Why not? He asked. She considered the question before answering. Because every time you arrived, The room felt peaceful instead of frightening. I have learned that fear and kindness rarely walk through the same door together. Ethan felt those words settle deep inside him. She had never measured him by confusion or appearances. She had judged only the peace he brought without realizing it himself. He placed his untouched cup on the table and looked directly at her. "Lily, I do not want to keep visiting this room because I am asleep." She met his gaze quietly. "Then how would you like to visit?" Ethan smiled with complete honesty, free from excuses for the first time. "I would like to knock on your door, hear you say good morning, share tea with you, and remember every conversation afterward." Lily's cheeks warmed with quiet happiness, though her voice remained calm. "I think I would like that too." Outside the small window, the old guardian wolf wandered into the garden and settled beneath the maple tree with peaceful satisfaction. Several younger wolves soon gathered nearby, resting quietly in the afternoon sunshine. Ethan noticed them and smiled. They no longer seemed to be leading him anywhere. Instead, they looked exactly like companions waiting patiently, content that the journey they had understood from the beginning had finally become clear to the man they had followed all along. Several months passed, and the palace slowly forgot the strange mystery that had once filled its quiet hallways with whispered questions. No guards were asked to lock impossible doors anymore. No scholars searched ancient scrolls for answers that refused to be written. Life continued with the steady rhythm of changing seasons. Autumn surrendered to winter. Winter welcomed the first signs of spring, and throughout it all one thing remained beautifully unchanged. Every morning, before attending the royal council, Ethan Ashford walked through the eastern corridor with calm, confident steps. He no longer arrived by accident. He always knocked gently upon the same familiar wooden door. Almost every morning, Lily Carter opened it before he had the chance to knock a second time, greeting him with the same warm smile that had first brought peace to a wolf before it ever reached the man. "Good morning, Your Majesty," she would say. Ethan always answered with quiet affection. "Good morning, Lily." Then they would share a simple cup of herbal tea while sunlight slowly filled the little room that had once seemed too humble for a king and had now become the place where he felt most like himself. The palace gradually accepted the new routine without surprise. Servants smiled whenever they saw the Alpha King carrying fresh flowers from the royal gardens instead of receiving elaborate gifts from distant kingdoms. Gardeners quietly saved the brightest blooms because they already knew exactly where those flowers would be placed. Captain Mason Reed stopped pretending not to notice whenever Ethan changed his morning route. One afternoon he finally allowed himself a small laugh before saying, "Your Majesty, I believe your schedule has become remarkably predictable." Ethan smiled without embarrassment. Some destinations are worth repeating. Even the elder Rowan visited the palace one final time before returning to the mountain sanctuary. As he watched Ethan and Lily walking through the gardens together while several wolves rested peacefully nearby, the old guardian quietly nodded. "The wolf no longer needs to guide him," he whispered. "Now the man knows the way." Lily herself never changed. She still gathered herbs before sunrise. She still prepared tea for tired servants. She still stopped to comfort frightened animals and lonely children with the same gentle patience she had always carried inside her heart. The only difference was that she no longer believed her kindness passed unnoticed. Whenever she looked across the gardens, she often found Ethan already watching with quiet admiration, not because she had become someone new, but because he had finally learned to see what had always been there. On the first evening of the next moon festival, music drifted across the palace courtyard as families gathered beneath glowing lanterns. Wolves rested peacefully among the guests without a trace of uneasiness, as though the entire kingdom had borrowed a little of Lily's quiet heart. Ethan stood beside her beneath the old maple tree where the aging sheepdog had once nudged his hand toward the truth. He gently reached for her hand, and this time there was no confusion, no forgotten memory, and no excuse waiting to hide behind instinct. "There was a time," Ethan said with a soft smile, "when I believed my wolf was making choices for me." Lily looked at him with the same calm eyes that had welcomed him from the very beginning. "And what do you believe now?" Ethan glanced toward the peaceful wolves resting across the moonlit grass before meeting her eyes once more. "I believe my wolf simply found home before I did." Lily smiled. And in that quiet moment, everything that had once seemed impossible finally became wonderfully simple. The kingdom remembered Ethan Ashford as a wise alpha king who ruled with strength and fairness. But those who truly knew him remembered something even greater. They remembered that the strongest leader in the kingdom became his happiest self only after he stopped arguing with the quiet truth already living inside his own heart. Because real strength was never found in resisting kindness. And sometimes the truest path home begins with following the gentle wisdom that love quietly places within the soul.